Net neutrality is the idea that the internet service provider corporations and the government must treat all data packets the same in terms of how they are accessed by users, so internet packages should allow access to the entire internet, and not wall off content based on paying different rates for different parts of the internet. It is the internet equivalent of equality before the law for a society. Now, with a man in the White House who is an opponent of net neutrality, those of us who want to preserve a free and open internet have something to worry about. Conservatives and right-wing libertarians have a fallacious understanding of this issue in which net neutrality somehow means that the internet is being run by the government, and that the free market is being interfered with. Well, I'm here to say that A, the infrastructure that has been set up by the government and granted to ISPs already from the very word go represents corporatist government control of the internet, and that B, markets are entirely contextual. The market that is important within the internet involves the choices of millions of websites, not the external monopolised market of just a few ISPs. The web is like a simulated society, and when the ISPs refuse to treat data packets the same and decide to throttle certain streams based on content, they are acting just like a government cracking down on market activity it doesn't like. They have a similar totalitarian power in that context. I am not saying that websites have a duty to treat all content the same. This is completely untenable and dysfunctional. It would mean that every website would have to become a homogeneous sea of spam regardless of its goals. There could be no true communities servicing particular tastes. It would be a disaster. By this analogy, the websites having to treat all content the same in some twisted parody of free speech would be the equivalent to a real-world society in which equality of outcome is completely dominant, and private property is overruled. Whereas net neutrality is equivalent to equality before the law because it means that the providers of the internet have no influence over content. That is for the actors within the internet on the site and user level to decide, much as owners of private property and consumers would in a real-world society. In the real world, the government has a tremendous monopolising power which cannot be escaped short of moving to another society. Private actors, providing they're in a market in which there are a wide array of alternatives, can be afforded action. And indeed they must act in order to provide for different desires and form society into separate spheres of interest. Actors with potentially totalitarian power like the government therefore must be held to the principle of equality before the law, so that people's interests are free to be represented through property. Large corporations that operate in markets in which there is no competition have the power to restrict choices to a narrow domain of options, and in a way they are an example of a narrow instance of property overruling the market as a whole and restricting other people's use of property. Though it is true that this is a more hazy area, unlike the more on or off nature of government versus private per se. These grey areas, however, cannot be ignored. The world is grey. If your principles of freedom are based purely on what is called a government and what is called private, then you'll imprison yourself in the name of that abstract theoretical freedom found only in textbooks. Imagine for a minute a world in which there were thousands of ISPs, they cost almost nothing and moving from one to the other was almost frictionless. In this imaginary world there indeed would be a market worth preserving to begin with. In this world, if any ISP decided to throttle data or charge higher rates for access to certain parts of the internet, consumers could simply move to a different ISP with ease. In that world, enforcing net neutrality might be unnecessary and may even hide a government trick. In the world we actually inhabit, the way the infrastructure works means that the ISPs have something that's not quite literally a natural monopoly, but at least something that promotes an oligopoly of a few companies in lockstep, with very little to distinguish them. With a centrist, context-based libertarian lens in contrast to the rigidity of the right libertarian one, we can see what's actually going on. The ISPs have this shit on lockdown, both in America and across the world due to similar technology. Violations of net neutrality are already happening. Comcast and Verizon have throttled torrent clients, and in Spain, where net neutrality has been officially defeated, the walling off of the internet into premium zones has already begun. In the American case, the FCC punished the ISPs for these actions, but if net neutrality were officially torn down in America, then the rest of the Western world would surely follow afterwards. America is the big man on campus, after all. It may already be too late. Donald Trump appointed Ajit Varadaraj Pai as the new FCC chairman, and in May of this year the process to roll back earlier net neutrality protections began, though it seems that there still may be some time before final deliberations. There has been very little pushback against this, however. Most leftists have been preoccupied with Trump's nationalism and haven't paid much attention to his more insidious conservative feelings on these kind of issues. Recently, a US judge went as far as to order ISPs and search engines to block Sci-Hub in an anti-piracy injunction against the website where scientific articles have broken through the paywall and been made available to the public. Things are already getting out of hand. Neither government nor ISPs should run the internet. The ISPs should provide the internet, and the government should keep them fair. Government should not manage the internet. That's the false solution from the left side of things. In that scenario, even if future technology made a true market possible, we'd still be under the thumb of a monopoly, and the biggest, baddest one of all, and we might never get a chance to utilise new infrastructure. Besides, as soon as the ideologues and the intelligence services get their hands on the wheel, that's it. They've shown themselves the enemy of free discourse. We are forced into a situation where we must use the coercive legalistic apparatus of the state to uphold net neutrality, but we must never allow the managerial apparatus of the state to decide who's calling the shots. But we must defend net neutrality, because if we don't, then the ISPs will financially restrict the internet, and when the managerial state does finally come knocking at the door, it will find everything as it wants it to be.